Many of us have played Civilization in our time playing video games, and if you're like me, it's one of your favorite game series of all time. I mean, the strategic balance in the game is perfect, the idea around running your own empire is just something that appeals to many of us, and the possibilities are pretty much endless. Winning a game of Civilization, it just feels amazing most of the times, because when you play the game, it takes usually many actual days to finish a match, but imagine playing for 10 years on one match and never being able to win. Over on r/gaming on Reddit, Lyserius submitted 5 years ago a post called "I've been playing the same game of Civilization 2 for almost 10 years. This is the result." This fortunate yet unfortunate fellow has literally been playing the same game of Civ 2 for 10 years because he has somehow found a way to lock the AI and himself into a seemingly endless war in which you can't really win and there's no way to get out of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and read the entire post to you guys, and then we're going to discuss it, and this honestly is one of my favorite gaming stories of all time. I mean, just this entire story, it's rare enough that you don't see it every day, but the premise behind it is just absolutely absurd. Anyways, I've been playing the same game of Civ 2 for 10 years. Though long outdated, I grew fascinated with this particular game because by the time that Civ 3 was released, I was already well into the distant future. I then thought it might just be interesting to see how far into the future I could get and see what the ramifications would be. Naturally, I play other games and have a life, but I often return to this game when I'm not doing anything to carry on. The results are as follows. The world is in a hellish nightmare of suffering and devastation, and there are 3 remaining supernations in the year 3991 AD, each competing for the scant resources left on the planet after dozens of nuclear wars have rendered vast swaths of the world uninhabitable wastelands. The ice caps have melted over 20 times somehow due primarily to the many nuclear wars. As a result, every inch of land in the world that isn't a mountain is inundated swampland useless to farming, most of which is irradiated anyway. As a result, big cities are a thing of the distant past. Roughly 90% of the world's populations, at its peak 2,000 years ago, has died either from nuclear annihilation or famine caused by the global warming that has left absolutely zero arable land to farm. Engineers, which are late-game worker units, are always busy continuously building roads so that new armies can reach the front lines. Roads are then destroyed the very next turn when the enemy goes, so there isn't any time to clear the swamps or clean up nuclear fallout. Only 3 supermassive nations are left: the Celts, which is the player, the Vikings, and the Americans. I find it really fitting that the Americans are just embroiled in a nuclear war with the Celts and the Vikings. This is why I love Civilization right here. I'm telling you, the possibilities are literally endless. Between the 3 of us, we have conquered all the other nations that have ever existed and assimilated them into our respective empires. You ever heard of the 100-Year War? Try the 1700-Year War. The 3 remaining nations have been locked in an eternal death struggle for almost 2,000 years. Peace seems to be impossible. Every time a ceasefire is signed, the Vikings will surprise attack me or the Americans the very next turn, often with nuclear weapons. Even when the UN forces a peace treaty. So I can only assume that peace will really come when they're wiped out. It is this that perpetuates the war ad infinitum. Have any of you old Civ 2 players out there ever had this problem in the post-late game? Because of SDI, ICBMs are usually only used against armies outside of cities. Instead, cities are constantly attacked by spies who plant the nuclear devices, which then detonate, something I greatly miss from later Civ games. Usually the downside of this is that every nation in the world declares war on you, but this is already the case, so it's no longer a deterrent to anyone, myself included. The only governments left are 2 theocracies and myself, a communist state. I wanted to stay a democracy, but the Senate would always overrule me when I wanted to declare war before the Vikings did. This would delay my attack and render my turn, and often my plans, useless, and of course, the Vikings would then break the ceasefire like clockwork the very next turn. Something I also miss in later Civ games is a little internal politics. Anyway, I was forced to do away with democracy roughly 1,000 years ago because it was just endangering my empire. But of course the people hate me now, and every few years since then there is a massive guerrilla, which is a late game barbarian, uprising in the heart of my empire that I have to deal with, which then saps resources from the war effort. The military stalemate is airtight. The post-late game in Civ 2 is perfectly balanced because all remaining nations already have all of the technologies, so there is no advantage. And there are so many units at once on the map that you could lose 20 tank units and not have your lines dented because you have a constant stream moving to the front. This also means that cities are not only tiny towers full of starving people, but you can never improve the city. Oh, you want a granary so you can eat? Sorry, I have to build another tank instead. Maybe next time. My goal for the next few years is to try and end the war and thus use the engineers to clear swamps and fallout so that farming may resume. I want to rebuild the world, but I'm not sure how to. If any of you old Civ 2 players have any advice, I'm listening. Edit. Wow guys, thanks for all your support. I had no idea this post would get this kind of response. I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on my efforts, whether here on Reddit, or a blog, or both. Now imagine in real life a world in which basically 3 countries are left. Every other nation on Earth has just been consumed by these empires. There is just a massive war that has turned into a stalemate. It's a nuclear war at that. The entire world just completely destroyed by radiation and nuclear bombs. Most of the population is gone. Everyone is basically living in small little communities just hoping that the next bomb doesn't hit them, right? That's a world we don't ever really want to see. I mean, obviously, this is Armageddon in real life. But this is why I love Civilization. You can have the Celts, the Vikings, and the Americans just nuking each other forever. What's actually really interesting about this is how he somehow managed to actually break the AI's logic cycle in the game. Most of the time in Civilization, things like this couldn't happen because for something like this to actually happen, all of the circumstances have to be in your favor. You have to build such a stalemate that the AI's logic can't really defeat you, and therefore you are locked in a stalemate. That logic has to fail itself and basically force them to just render themselves a stalemate-built nation. The logic at that point decides that war is the only real option, and that if you try and use peace, it's over for you, which, I mean, since there's 2 AI, that could be a little bit more reasonable, but even then, one AI declaring war on the other and then them declaring war on the human player is what seems to be actually causing this war to keep repeating. So if the AI decided, hey, maybe we should end this war, that would actually probably stop this entire thing. Then again, he says that the only way he sees peace coming to the entire game is if they're both eliminated, so who knows. But the rarity of something like this happening in a game of Civilization is just, I'd love to see the odds on it. I wonder if anyone's ever actually, like, done the math on this one, you know? And there are some pretty good suggestions, like from Donut EF, which is, I think, the highest rated comment here. His plan to sort the mess out would be something along these lines. Forget ending the war, try and get your front line such that you can consistently withstand attack, forcing a stalemate. Basically stop wasting production on tanks and planes that are going to get nuked anyway. I think he actually said that they're basically in a stalemate that can't really be broken, so change to fundamentalism. I remember this was bad for research, but you don't need it now anyway, but the people will stop hating you and you'll have more coin. Get your core cities to rebuild and fix the land surrounding them, which is costly in engineers, and get farm and production moving. He's guessing it'll take a lot of turns to build a tank in a low population city. Once it's in place, build an army of tanks, mountain troops, artillery, and spies, the like of which has never been seen, and keep it off the front lines. Build railroads as far as they'll go without losing engineers. Once all is in place, get spies in every city, enough to guarantee a nuke hit, all the way to the capital, hit them all at once and drop in the mountain boys, wait for the nuke response, hopefully using their whole stockpile, then move your conventional army in and mop up the mess, repeat with the other guys. I mean, the entire community has rallied around this post and given so many suggestions that, I mean, I'm pretty sure the map has been released. Let me try and find this. Actually, while finding this, I found an update 4 years ago from Laserius, update to the Eternal War. It's been 1 year to the day since I shared my 10, now 11-year-old game of Civ 2, affectionately dubbed the Eternal War. In that time, some things have changed, while others have not. After my original post, I was overwhelmed with the response and number of helpful strategies and spent much of the last year experimenting with them. Of particular effectiveness was Stumpster's 58-year solution, which I was able to execute within a similar time frame. I've included the link to a strategy so that those interested may review the details themselves. I'm gonna go ahead and skip down to the real beef of this whole thing. The year is 4200 AD. The world is a nightmare of suffering and devastation. This has not changed. 2 more centuries of war has yielded no victor. But of course this is now by design rather than stalemate. Rather than destroy the Vikings, my largest operation of the 41st century was a massive naval and land offensive to capture the new Viking capital of Pisa with the intention of instigating a civil war among their people. This is something unique to Civ 2, where a civilization would split into 2 separate civs if their capital was captured during a time of war. The naval campaign was a disaster. Viking cruise missiles wiped out most of the fleet along with most of the troops and transport before they ever made landfall. Eventually Pisa did fall, but this did not result in a civil war as I had hoped. I soon withdrew from the city, which was of course recaptured shortly thereafter, and so went 40 years of planning and preparation. The 42nd century was dominated by an unprecedented number of uprisings and rebellions across my empire. Every other year it seemed as though fresh waves would replace the rebels I gunned down the year before. Even with my overwhelming military advantage, it became difficult to cope with. The rebels would appear outside of some of my most developed cities and tear up the roads before I could react. With the roads gone, it became an ordeal to move troops close enough to attack them. Before I could, some more rebels would appear elsewhere and thus divide my attention. This culminated in the sacking of the city Shoreside Vale. Actually, wait, Shoreside Vale. I see what he did here. I knew I realized what that was. That's from Grand Theft Auto 3, man. That's a throwback. At that point, for the first time ever, I had more troops engaged in quelling rebellions than fighting the Vikings. Those both rhymed, and not because they were particularly powerful, but because there were so many and so disparate, spread across all reaches of my empire. Eventually I created a squadron of fighters not bound by roads, specifically to engage rebels, so the rest of my production could be focused on maintaining status quo on the front lines. This is where things stand now. My alliance with the Americans remains strong and the Sioux remain weak. All is as it should be. I shall update you on the situation once again before the end of the year, and remember, Big Brother is watching. So you might be thinking that this entire thing was basically impossible to resolve because obviously it's called the Eternal War, but that's not true. Stumpster had a 58-year solution. It was basically the best way to go at it, it seems like, and he somehow solved this unsolvable puzzle, so I'm gonna go ahead and read that post to you too. Be smart about what you're buying. Offshore platforms are mandatory on any major coast city for any production to occur. Spend your treasury on the first possible turn to fast build them. Seriously, you could just stop here and be in a gigantically improved position. In fact, here's a save where I spent the first couple turns selling useless buildings and building harbors and offshores if you want to skip doing this. You can easily get quite a few cities back up to a reasonable amount of production. At the end of my game, I had these 3 cities over 30 shields per turn: Balam, Dinas Tirith, Dukedom Dalet, Chetau Diff, Monte Cristo, Issus, and Selbina. I only built 2 engineers the entire game. You do not need them. Doing the massive re-terraforming of Earth is a lengthy and difficult process even if nukes are not flying around. The only thing these guys need to do is connect your cities with railroads, because you are only using the ocean. You do not give 2 shits about pollution. Taking on the Vikings. Hopefully your alliance with the Americans hold. Mine lasted about 30 years, which was enough to get production back up and build my army up reasonably. Fighting a 2-front war would be much more difficult without a doubt. First thing first, the 2 choke points shown in red are a pain to fight through, and because they are undeveloped, are very slow to fight through. This gives the Vikings ample time to nuke or apply stealth bombers to you. Instead, I opted for a page out of MacArthur's book and performed my Incheon landing. There are 2 things to consider here. Your transport must be able to reach across the gap in 1 turn to prevent it from being sunk, and you want to land in a developed area and use the Vikings' own railroads against them. Because of how intertwined your units are in their own countryside, they're never able to nuke the army. Howitzers really should be the main portion of your army. Fighting that triple defense that city walls gives is unacceptable if they have mechanical infantry behind them. And the follow-up is where it gets interesting, because all of your production facilities are on islands and transporting them of course would suck. We are going to abuse airlifts. You'll probably have 2 major island producers of howitzers, and they shouldn't have any problem pausing production to build an airport, or half build and half buy. You'll probably have the cash on hand by that point. After the landing, I immediately purchased an airport in Sydney and airlift every damn turn into there. That combined with the constant reinforcements from across the ocean, remember to move the transport into Sydney with units on it, they auto-disembark and save a movement point. It opens up a soft underbelly of the Vikings. At this point, you can use the own railroad system that they've built against them and hit them in the cities toward the back while their bombers and nukes are being located there. If partisans break down one of the railroads from Sydney to the rest of Vikingville, try to get an engineer to at least stick a road there. Howitzers fighting at 1/3 can at least nail the ridiculously soft targets like spies, engineers, and missiles, but don't go throwing them away against anything harder at 1/3 strength. As far as fighting America goes, there are very strong air power units, mini helicopters, stealth bombers, and they had 4 nukes when they fought them, but they have a minimal ground force. I got the jump on them with a majority of my howitzer army and knocked them from around 430 units on a map to under 250 in a turn. The counterattack from the first turn was very strong, about 18 units lost, not counting the city they managed to nuke, but dropped off rapidly as their bombers lost the airfields that they needed to base out of. Their navy is nothing in comparison to the Viking Navy, so if you have any veterans from that, you should sweep aside the weak American Navy without issue. 2 battleships, 1 Aegis, 3 destroyers, 1 submarine was all he saw from the American Navy. You already have a strong railroad connection, so the key here is just hitting them fast and hard. You don't want to get bogged down. This is absolutely insane. I mean, obviously, he took a little bit of inspiration from the original plan, but he also put his own twist on it, like instead of focusing on engineers like the original plans, or the most voted for original plans said to do, he decided not to do that, and he went an entirely different way, and it seems like it worked out, because in 58 years in game, he decided that it was all over with as he won the game. Guys, this has been an absolutely entertaining thing to read back on. I mean, I haven't went back and read this in years, but I remember reading this as a kid playing Civ 3 on my computer when I was just real young when this finally actually came out and was really popular to begin with. And this thing just inspired me so much. I actually tried to recreate this many times, and of course I was never successful because I was a little ass kid, and obviously this is a pretty hard thing to pull off, especially by accident. But just imagine having a game of Civ just go to the point where you cannot stop the war and the game basically becomes eternal. This is one of the most interesting stories in gaming, in my opinion, and I hope you share the same opinion, guys. If you did enjoy this video and you're interested in reading more about this eternal war, I will leave some resources for you down in the description below, and hopefully you guys did enjoy, like I said before. If you did, make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new, follow me on Twitter for thoughts and updates, join the Discord linked below, and of course, until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, signing out. Wait a minute, no, I'm not signing out yet. I forgot last video to shout this out, but I remember I have before. I started a gaming channel a while back, and I haven't really done much with it. Anyways, I've uploaded my first few videos on there. We are now approaching 400 subscribers on that, so we're on the road to 1,000 for that. I'm going to go ahead and leave a link down below for that too, and at the end of the video on the end screen, so hopefully you do go ahead and subscribe to that channel too. And now Optimus is finally signing out.